Right. This is The Authority Under New Management, as you can see. This is a trade paperback that collected issues 9 to 16. And it features two stories, Outer Dark and Nativity. I started reading Nativity. That was the one that I originally found when I discovered The Authority and fell in love with the book. And then when I went back and read them, picked up all the issues back in the 90s, I was impressed with the artwork on Outer Dark, and that's how I discovered Bryan Hitch. So yeah, it was a love at first and second sight in many respects. It gave me a background in the character. I really enjoyed the stories that we talked about in the Relentless book. But this one is special to me because of Nativity and because I discovered The Authority this way. So let's focus on Outer Dark, have a look at that. And that's the first story in this book, The Authority Under New Management. Bit of a foreword there by Frank Quitely, Bryan Hitch, Warren Ellis, and Mark Millar. And so yeah, we got Outer Dark, then we got like the thematic page that he likes to have there. We are not free. Now, before we get into the story, one of the things about The Authority that I feel is misrepresented today, and I might have mentioned it in the first book, was the idea that these are somehow cold, callous killers, or they're not heroes. And I really struggle with that. I mean, I've heard a lot about the marketing that's been done for The Authority, and I've even heard the idea that The Authority are going to be the villains in the new Superman film, which again, I mean, I'm not a fan of the Wildstorm universe in the DC universe, but that's the way the cookie crumbled. And yeah, the idea that they're anti-heroes as well, that also doesn't sit well with me. Yeah, I mean, they do things extreme, but sometimes it's required. And I think considering some of the threats that they face and the people that they have to deal with, that makes perfect sense. These are not superheroes dealing with like small-time crooks. These are full-on megalomaniac nut jobs and shadowy conspiratorial forces. So their brand of justice is completely balanced by the enemies they face. And one of the things that just annoys me is that they're made out to be just lunatics. And I feel that they were written that way later on. It kind of, because the writers after Warren Ellis and Mark Millar didn't really understand what The Authority was actually about. They just looked at the name, came up with an idea, and they kind of went with it. Now, this story for me just illustrates how beautiful and subtle the character development actually was in The Authority that we just don't hear about. And you have to remember that The Authority is kind of an analogy for the Justice League, which will become important later on in this. So here we have Jenny Sparks, and she's a character that's basically serves as the girl boss archetype that you see in all around nowadays. But she was written with a wisdom and subtlety that we just don't see nowadays. She's just a character who stopped aging in 1922, and she had adventures through the 20th century, and she collects adventures like a nerd collects Pokemon cards. And she's just been around for so long, and everything she's done has helped shape the world into what it is, for good or for ill. And again, that concept illustrates like the world is not a good place, yet she's had 100 years to help guide it and defend it. So it's this idea in The Authority is this is the world that we live in. It's not a good world, but it's the best we have, and down to the efforts of people who are good, heroic, selfless people. And despite the character building that they put around her, that's who she is. She is a true hero. She's just a bit rough around the edges. So just to give you a bit of a background, if you don't know, in the Wildstorm universe, they kind of went with this idea that there are century babies and that these are like the self-defense of the human race. And they were all born on the very first day of the millennia. And then for the next 100 years, they play a part in shaping the world, and that's what Jenny Sparks is. Now, there's another couple of those babies that are mentioned, and they are the focus of other issues, and specifically The Planetary, another Warren Ellis book, which is absolutely one of my favorite books of all time, and I will definitely do a series on that. But yeah, these Century babies, this one, like Elijah from The Planetary, Jenny was born on the 1st of January 1900, and then they guide and protect the 20th century. And now Jenny's doing her part, and Elijah's doing his somewhere off page, and those worlds will eventually cross over at some point. But yeah, this is a spoiler for this book. This is, if you don't want to read any more about this, you want to read this for yourself, I totally understand. So in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, I'm going to spoil the plot. So if you're still here, it's your own fault. She dies. Yes, this story kills her off, and this intimate tale that we're about to see is played out on a world stage. But never forget that this is a story about a young woman. I say young woman, old young woman, recognizing that she's lived a long life, and this is possibly the end. And she's doing what all people do near the end, taking stock and thinking about the legacy that she's leaving behind. And so that's what this book is. When you frame this book like that, it kind of removes that idea of them being anti-heroes or whatever that the DC likes to market them as now. So we see the carrier, lovely establishing shot. I mean, Bryan Hitch's art to do this sort of thing. You know, at the time, people didn't appreciate it, but I think now we can kind of see that this is just a great way of illustrating scale and grandeur. And it's one of the things that's hallmark of Bryan Hitch's work. And for me, it's just a real beautiful thing to look at. So we get the first glimpse of the threat, something coming from outer space. So we know it's a space-related thing. And then we get to see these beautiful vignettes of the characters in the Authority doing things other than punching people in the brain. So again, we're getting some character building. But this is a team book. And in the world of the Wildstorm, they didn't have Apollo and Midnighter series when this was out. Everything of the characterization of these characters was done in the pages of the Authority. So, you know, and I think that is the way to go. It's one of the things I enjoy about reading One Punch Man, is that you've got your titular character, but you've also got this ongoing story of the Hero Association built up in the peripheries. And I like this kind of characterization in the periphery of the team book rather than having their own individual series, because there's always a disconnect for me. It never quite is exactly the same character as you see in the team book. So those subtle differences can ruin the story if you're jumping from one to the other. So I like this. I prefer this method of storytelling. I think it's just more coherent. So we see the Doctor. He's learning a bit more about his unique abilities. And then we go back to more build-up. This time, Space Shuttle Endeavour in Earth orbit. Love the Space Shuttle, as you know. My book Intrepid that I've worked on and recently had crowdfunded focuses heavily on the Space Shuttle. I love that imagery. So yeah, we don't get a great shot of it, but that's fine. And then the beloved Space Shuttle gets attacked by, you know, space sperm, whatever it is. So you're getting the idea that whatever these are coming from is probably pretty big. And they're pretty lethal. And there we go. We see that whatever it is lands on Earth and creates this nest, this kind of bio-organic mass. And it's doing something insidious. And then we cut to New York. And the King of Cities, Jack Hawksmoor. You know, again, I love the thing about the Authority, their weird powers. The ability to see through the windows of New York City, or breathe pollution, walk up walls, jump really far. I mean, it just seemed free. And this page really captures Jack Hawksmoor having a blast with his abilities. And he's going to visit a fellow teammate, Angela Spiker, who is the engineer in a human form. And so she recognizes something's happening, and then we get to see the door in action, the portal that the Authority use to travel around. It gives them great ability to fight on a global scale, instantly traveling anywhere in the multiverse. So that's a real handy power. And then we get more build up. And I really love this build up because it's really cinematic, you know, looking at things from multiple angles and seeing people with the different elements of the threat that's emerging. It builds a scale. Yet more space adventure, this time on the moon. So something's on the moon. So, you know, we're getting a multi-pronged attack from a massive force. And then here we go. This is one of my, this links nicely to my theory. Well, not really a theory because it's obvious, but a lot of people don't talk about this, that the Authority in the Wildstorm universe itself is kind of a follow-on in spirit to Vertigo comics. And, you know, we get the archetypes here that you would see that were already established in the Vertigo storylines, and some of the concepts of the Doctor is that he's a shaman. He's the latest in a long line of shaman that have protected the world. And using figures like Jesus Christ, you know, and Albert Einstein, and looking at it, Rasputin, you kind of setting a really controversial note, stating that these people are on the same level, which is just right up the right out of the Vertigo playbook. So it's great. And we've even got the here we've got the John Constantine analog. And I believe that character, I don't know if that was intentional, but he gets fleshed out a little bit in the Planetary book. So that's something to look forward to. But again, here we go. Yet more evidence that the roots of the Wildstorm universe definitely were started in the DC Vertigo universe. And again, yet more build up. This time it was looking at the sun. Now we're looking at the moon. And so people are beginning to realize all around the world that something's happening. And this is another part of what makes the Authority good. They are not infallible. They are not aware of what's happening, and they're not quite together. They're still amateurish, but they're immensely powerful, and they've got potential to be something huge. And again, this is all part of the story of Jenny Sparks' legacy. So there we go. And so here we see the first image of the threat. And the former Doctor tells the current Doctor that the owners of Earth have returned and that they want it back. And so that's the key to the threat. Basically, God has returned, and now the Authority have to stop him before he wipes out all life on Earth. So that is really the stakes of the book. And what really makes this book stand apart for me is the heroic nature of the Authority. So here we see Apollo and Midnighter arrive in Tokyo. Yet more beautiful panels by Bryan Hitch, beautiful photorealistic renderings of architecture and scene setting. And, you know, I love the way, you know, you see Midnighter here, Apollo clearly blasting off to go face the threat that's coming. You know, that's really, I love that stuff because it reminds me of the Richard Donner Superman perspective, and how he used to use people on the street to kind of tell the story of what was happening in the air without having to show it all the time. Just brilliant storytelling. So again, you see here Apollo doing his Superman bit, taking out the threat, but realizing it's just too much, and some of them reach the ground, so that makes them Midnighter's problem. And Midnighter quickly realizes this is just out of control. If Apollo can't hold him in the air, there's no chance he's going to hold him on the ground. So he says to the rest of the team, forget us, we'll do our best, but it looks like this is it. This is terminal for Japan. There's nothing that can be done. And obviously that sets the scene. We see death, destruction on a massive scale, which is exactly what we expect in an Authority book. And then we cut to a slightly more peaceful side. Now, this is where the Authority really struggle because they've only got a number of people that can deal with any threats at any one time. So this is one of those overwhelming situations where they've got a global catastrophe and they can't really handle it. and only one or two members of the team are able to ever handle what's happening at any one time. So it really does require them to step up. The weakness in the team is the lack of teamwork and the amateurish way that they are blindly understanding the threats and dealing with them. So again, there's a lot to be to like about the Authority as a team, and the heroicness is often lost. People dealing with stuff that they can't handle. It's something that we can all relate to. So to finish up, this story really ends in a unusual way, in a slightly contrived and cliche way. It's got some amazing parts in it. One of my favorite parts is a moment between the engineer who blasts off into space. We get to see the joy of being a superhero. We get to see, her enjoying this time. And same with Apollo. The two of them sit on the moon, and this is my favorite page in the story. They take a moment to enjoy the immense privilege of being superheroes. So the idea that they're anti-heroes just aggravates me, because this is clearly not what he was trying to do. I mean, I could be wrong, but for me, they were heroes first. The cold justice that they dished out was always relational to the kind of threat that they were facing. So, I think that's a totally acceptable point. More beautiful scene-setting art. Now, you've got to remember the carrier is huge, so this thing is ultra massive. And so the plot becomes, how do we stop this thing? How do we stop this thing? And then they figure out from the inside. So more beautiful artwork. The story kind of drags a little bit here, but it's still a great story. It gives everyone a moment to shine. And that's what, sets it apart. So they convince the carrier, which is a sentient spaceship, to go off and tackle God. And so they fly inside its veins. And then this basically gives the ability to deal with it from the inside. And the idea is, we can blow up the spaceship if we have to. But rather than sacrificing the ship, Jenny sacrifices herself. Once they reach the brain, she utilizes all of her power to destroy this thing. And it costs her everything. On the stroke of midnight, she's done. And so then the question of that Warren Ellis posed of what happens to the spirit of the 20th century at the stroke of midnight is answered. It gets reborn. And that leads directly into the next story, the Nativity. Now, this is where the Authority takes a shift. And this is where you could argue that some of the subtlety that Warren Ellis built up was completely removed by Mark Millar. And again, I'm not quite sure that removed is the correct term, because this was a team on the ascendancy. They were learning their power, learning their role, understanding the nature of the threat and dealing with it accordingly. And I think calling them ruthless or anti-heroes is probably fair on the one level, but it's also wrong on others. They're doing what Superman and Batman should have done. Letting the Joker out, or letting the threats, escape again and again to hurt people. Every time you let them go, you're not responsible, but you've assisted in allowing a threat to continue that could have been neutralized. And I guess, the finality of dealing with threats is important. And the Authority is a team that refuses to accept the status quo. If they're going to save the world and risk their necks and save the world, they're going to do it on their terms. And that means getting rid of entrenched dictatorships who the global community say it's too delicate to deal with. But, we all know the reason that these dictators stay in line is because they're doing business with the West, who are mining minerals or getting ore or getting oil, whatever it is. And that's the real reason that they're still in power, is because we enable it. Well, if the Authority were a real super team, they wouldn't want to risk their lives to allow this status quo to continue, and they don't. But the other thing is that they use the massive resources they have at their disposal to actually make a difference in the world. And so this is the legacy that Jenny Sparks left behind. This is what she wanted for the world. You know, without her in it, this is the last part she gets to play in it. And she didn't know what was going to happen to her. So again, it's inherently heroic. She's trying to make the world a better place. And they say that repeatedly. So this idea that they're just evil, like evil near supervillains, is just ridiculous. And it's indicative of the way that we look at authority figures and police figures nowadays. We see them as oppressors, which is just nonsense, because most of these people join the police force or join the army because they want to defend, not because they want to oppress. It's very easy to throw that label at people when you're not strong enough to protect yourself. They've got the strength and you envy it, so you call them names and pull them down, and that is just as old as time. So to see it being done with the authorities is very frustrating, because for me, they are heroes first. And it's indicative. And this story illustrates that they have very little concern for the way that the world is being ran, just as Jenny Sparks set them up to be. And you also have to understand that in Stormwatch, these guys had seen how the global powers had mishandled dealing with threats. So these were jaded, cynical people who found a calling, a higher calling, to save the people of Earth from the very people that were supposed to be looking after it. So again, it casts the world order as the villain, and that becomes more apparent as the book goes on. But again, they mess it up as it goes on, because obviously they didn't have the immense talent of Mark Millar and Warren Ellis as the story went on, and it went into other creators' hands. We got a slightly garbled view of the authority. So the great threat in this one is that they recognize that Jenny Sparks has been reborn, and they decide, a shadowy organization decide that they're not having that. She's got to go. And this organization sends superheroes who are not unlike the Avengers. You know, we've got our Captain America analog, we've got our Wasp analog, we've got Iron Man analog, and instead of being heroes, they're murderous individuals, mercenaries who decide to do infanticide and just destroy a ward of babies. This really doesn't get much more evil than that, does it? And so the Doctor's already got there. He's found Jenny, the reincarnated Jenny. And he now has to face the Avenger analog team alone. And we get to see some excellent artwork by Frank Whiteley. You know, a lot of people don't like his works. A lot of people love it. He's kind of like Marmite in that respect, but I fell firmly in the camp of love. You know, I loved his line work and the characterization that he put into his artwork and the poses and stuff. He had a great eye for detail. And so you get to see all these superheroes, supervillains surrounding the Doctor. And these are hitters as heavy as the Authority. And then they decide, well, we'll just take out this baby, we'll take out the Doctor, you ain't going to hand it over. And then something happens. And then we cut to the aftermath of the Authority's party that they've had on the carrier. A little cameo by an unconscious grunge there from Gen 13. And yeah, it's not gone well for them. It seems that they underestimated that baby, and now fight's on. So here we get the Justice League analog that is the Authority versus the Avengers analog, which are the villains of this story. And that is just epic. And it's decisive. Immediately, the Authority go for the kill shot. Because they're not dealing with supervillains. They're dealing with mercenaries. And I guess you need to kind of get that in your head. But anyway, I don't want to spoil this story. As I've gone on now, I've gone on too long. But this story has an excellent resolution. And it showcases the abilities of the Authority. So I really recommend reading this one. I And I just don't want to ruin it because I'm sitting here reading it thinking, man, I wish it was my first time all over again. But yeah, if you want to see, as close as you will ever see, the Justice League having a proper fight with the Avengers, then this is the book to read. And I think that's what the Wildstorm universe did so well. It set it up so well. And that's what made it so popular back in the 90s. So that is, I'm going to leave it there. The Authority, issues 9 to 16 collected in under new management trade paperback. If you can get your hands on it, this is the one I would recommend getting. And then I like this series. I like the covers. I like the way it's done. The design work on the book itself is lovely. So yeah, they're still out there. But I would get these rather than get the new reprints. I mean, obviously the artwork and colouring is probably much the same in both issues. But I just think that this one had the more upbeat tone that Warren Ellis was trying to set for his book, and not the, I don't know, the negative, cynical, marketed spin that the new books are putting on the Authority. Yeah, and this is the perfect way to get into the one. So if you want to read the first one, that's obviously The Authority Relentless. That's here. That's the first book, and I love that cover. I think it's a brilliant cover, better than any of the covers on the reprints. And then you've got this one. So yeah, go out today, do yourself a favor, go out today, get this book and enjoy it. The best that the 90s had to offer. So thanks for watching. Bye.